Yeah.
My dog.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Where should I start? All right. Um, Thank you for being here. And would you like to introduce yourself? Could you give me your name and pronouns and kind of your position in like the pole community and yeah, the scene in general?
Sure. So my name's Kelly. I'm the owner of Rise Pole Fitness. My pronouns are she, her. And I've been pole dancing for like 6 or 7 years now. And I've owned the studio for 3 years now, I think.
So let's start off with about you. Um, how did you become interested in pole dancing? Explain your journey, what space you were in first that you were introduced to, and how did it change over time?
So, I got into pole dancing through like using a Groupon. I was doing a lot of gym exercises and wanted something that would be an active activity that wasn't just going to the gym. And I started with floor work for about a year and then finally worked up the courage to be able to go and take an actual pole class. Then once I started that, I was hooked and I couldn't stop. Um, so after a year of training, I ended up getting accepted into UC Davis. And in order to move out of my parents' house and go to UC Davis, I decided that I was going to become a stripper after hearing how much my one of my teachers made. And so after a year of just pole dancing, I ended up also becoming a stripper. So I definitely started in the space of like being a naive pole dancer, just going in it for exercise, not really like having that as the intention of going to be a stripper. But then once I did become a stripper, pole and stripping definitely like morphed together for me over time. Um, yeah. Did that fully answer that for you?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sweet.
Mm, and then I feel like this kind of is a really great transition with what you said, but how do you think pole dancing has changed you as a person? You know?
Yeah. So pole dancing has definitely affected me in a huge way. It has been a very big factor in my confidence, in me connecting to my sensuality. When I first started pole dancing, I was really insecure. I was really depressed. I was very uh, just not confident in myself, looks wise or in personality. I didn't really like talking to people. I wasn't social, um, at least with like strangers. So after starting pole dance, after a year of kind of like dipping my toes into the water, um, I finally was able to like start seeing myself in more of a sensual, sexual way. And then as soon as I started stripping, that really like skyrocketed everything. So with stripping, I had to very quickly get used to having conversations with strangers all the time and being able to own that situation. And it also helped me set boundaries and stick to my boundaries and made me feel really confident in myself because I finally like had power. And even though as a stripper you are told no all the time and you go through a lot of you're like denied a lot, you're rejected a lot.
Mhm.
You're able to get used to that and know that it's not personal, and then actually like still feel confident in yourself without getting outside validation. I feel like for in the early days also, like being able to do things that I never thought that I could, going into a pole class and you're like, wow, there's no way I'm ever doing an invert. There's no way I'm ever doing, a Superman. And then you do it and you're like, wow, I wonder what other limiting beliefs I have about myself.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said.
Thank
I
you.
really resonate with that as well. On to the next question.
Perfect.
Um, where do you see yourself in the pole culture and stripping culture? Describe your presence and what you believe you attribute to it. If you don't believe you do, why?
Hmm. So, in my experience of starting pole first and then going into stripping. I feel like that's somewhat of a rarity in our pole culture in general. A lot of times people will start stripping and they'll never take a pole class, or if they do, it's years down the line. And then it's a lot of times if people start pole, they'll just stick to pole, but they don't ever really go into that other like stripping category. Um, and so I feel like I like to think that I am offering a little bit of a bridge between the two worlds, which um, a lot of times in pole dance, you don't really go into that true stripper style where you are dancing for like sexual experience. And I feel like with stripping, a lot of times you are just focused on the job, but you're not really focused on like the hobby fun part. So I feel like I'm starting to kind of bring those two worlds together, and start, you know, merging things like offering stripping 101 so that full students can get exposed to the stripping style. But then also as a working stripper, I'm, able to show my coworkers that if they want to, they can come to classes and experience the studio without feeling like they have to be intimidated because they fear that they might get looked down upon for stripping.
Yes, really well said. And is there maybe a reason why you would call like your classes Stripping 101 other than like another name? Because I feel like in other studios, maybe like it's called striptease or like erotic or exotic, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you feel like there's intention to calling it more specifically Stripping 101?
Yeah, I didn't want to shy away from really what my purpose of starting that class was. So it's morphed a little bit since I started it, but the original intention came from the fact that I was a pole instructor, but I had, up to 10 private lessons a week from people who wanted me to train them on how to get into the industry. So it was just so much of my time that was getting taken up by these private lessons. So I was like, why don't I just start a class where I can teach people these things over a length of time? Because there's so much that goes into being able to become a successful stripper or being successfully hired. So I started the class and basically named it Stripping 101 because it was supposed to be kind of like an on ramp for people to learn how to dance for a stage show specifically. And I would also answer questions that they would have about the industry, like how to get hired, how to ask for tips, what an audition feels like, just anything like that, or things that you might encounter in lap dances. So we've kind of taken out that question and answer portion because I feel like that doesn't apply to as many people now, and I offer that kind of more as like an on needed basis.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like naming it that in the beginning was definitely like, no, this is what you're doing it for. It's for stripping, it's the stripping culture. And that's what you're going to find in here. It's not just like sexy style. It's specifically for the strip club.
Not a
Yeah.
lot of people have guidance even when entering like the strip scene. So it's really great work that you're doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. I've
Yeah.
been hearing from, some of my coworkers over the years as it's kind of become more and more popular in my community and with like the strip experience. I've been hearing from some coworkers that like they wish that they would have had this when they got hired or when they were getting into the industry. And me too. I'm offering something that I feel like I wish I would have had a little bit more of when I first got hired. Like when I first got hired, the only thing that was out there was from another studio out in Roseville. I did like 3 private lessons with the owner, which gave me a little bit of knowledge on like how to dance like a stripper, but there's so much that goes into it that like, it's really hard to grasp in just 3 lessons. But other than that, all I had was going on and, looking at blogs to try and see what experience people had. And it changes from state to state and club to club so much that it's just really hard to like get resources for your local community.
Wow.
So yeah,
I kind of want to skip then some questions and kind of delve
sure.
into this because I feel like there's a flow going. Um, like how hard is it to find information about stripping? And do you feel like it has changed over time, or like where did you find your information specifically, and what isn't like available that you think should be?
Hmm. So the private lessons that I ended up getting, which was like the most local that I could find, was from Tiffany at Vertical Fitness. Um, and then other than that, I was able to reach out to one of my teachers at the time to get a little bit of information. She helped me out a lot. But if she hadn't been a stripper working at my pole dance studio, then I would have had virtually no resources other than the internet. So when I first started 6 years ago, I basically could find like a couple of outdated blogs and like maybe a Reddit thread here and there. But a lot of the information was kind of just very vague. It would give you survival tips and things like that, and some etiquette things, and that was really cool. But I feel like nowadays, people with Instagram having it be way more usable and way more of like kind of a business that helps give tips out. There's more people who are creating brands based off of helping people, like the Dancer's Resource, or even like Tales from the Strip, kind of giving a voice for what really strippers are feeling in the industry, is helping like just give more of a real look at what it means to be a stripper so that you can kind of understand what it is before you get into it. But I think over the years, it's definitely become more and more popular to be able to come out as a stripper because it's not as stigmatized. I mean, of course, it still is, but I think now, even like having an anonymous Instagram, at least that's available. You don't have to like start a blog where you have to put your name on it, and like it just seems more readily available now.
All right, let's jump back into the about you part.
Perfect.
Um, how do you see your identity interacting with the subculture?
Um, so I identify as female. I'm also queer, but I'm not super like outspoken about that. Um, I feel definitely accepted for who I am, and I feel like I'm able to meet so many people of so many different identities that it really helps me understand who I am, but also appreciate others and feel very united with so many different people, um, especially in the pole community. And then in stripping, I feel like you're seen as just kind of a, at least as like who I am as a stripper, you're just seen as like this caricature of like, well, she's this like white blonde girl next door look kind of a thing. So I feel like that kind of my identity kind of plays into that caricature that I kind of play off of in order to make money. Um, but I definitely feel more seen in the pole dance community where I'm able to just be me. And as long as I'm coming at the community with love and acceptance, then I know that I'm going to be loved and accepted.
Thank you for that. And then on to the next question. Um, you are someone who is both in the strip scene and the pole dance scene. Would you say that the pole dance studio is a space for stripping to become more accessible, or is it a space that takes the performance of stripping and commodifies it to create a more acceptable format? If you disagree with these two perspectives, why?
Hmm. I think that. the pole studio should be a place where stripping becomes more accepted. So I think when, at least in my classes, in my Strip 101 and 201 classes, I don't shy away from certain movements and why we are doing them the way that we are. I'm not saying like, of course you're dancing for yourself and for your own style because ultimately that's how you gain the confidence to look good on stage. But I'm not shying away from the fact that like we're spreading our legs for the view of customers who are primarily men. Like we're getting into certain positions on stage to create a fantasy for people that is like, yeah, imagine that you're having sex with me, and like so even in class, I'm bringing that kind of reality into it, and it's okay because just because you're stripping and, owning that sexuality for a commodity, I don't think that that should be shamed. And if you're learning strip style, then you need to know why you are doing the things that you're doing because that's why strippers are doing the things that they're doing. You're not just like spreading your legs for yourself, you're spreading your legs so that you can make money. Yeah, yeah.
Like
And I think it kind of
literally.
goes back to that um comment that you said about sorry, I lost my thought. Um about why I named it Strip 101 is like other classes might, use kind of the strip style, but then they skirt around like the fact that it's a sexual dance. And so I feel like this kind of goes back to my view that in pole studios, like, yes, you can have the non sexualized dance, but I think that there should also be a space that you're not shying away from that fact.
When navigating all these subcultures of the pole community, aka like different dance styles, fitness related or work, etc., what relationships do you see? How do you think each group interacts with each other? And what are the perspectives they have on one another?
Mm.
From your perspective, you know?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that there's two specific main subcultures. So the pole studio community and then the stripping work community. I think the stripping work community has, I think, less styles and subcultures that kind of go into it. Um, However, there are obviously still different subcultures. There's like stage shows specific, towns where you make more of your money on stage. There's other, ones where you don't make as much money on stage, but more of like the lap dance focus. But I think that goes into just like how you're making your money and not necessarily like the subculture you're identifying as. Like you're still identifying as a stripper.
Mhm.
But then in the pole dance world, I think that there are definitely a lot of different subcultures in that studio world. So I think that there's, performers, there's people who are more into that erotic pole, and then there's people who are more into the sport of it, and they really try to like kind of they don't gravitate toward the sensual side as much. And I think that that's fine as long as you're not like, discriminating on the other side. Like if you're not really into it, then that's fine. But like, you know, don't put anybody else down for it. Um, but historically, studios in bringing pole dancing to the mainstream had to kind of separate itself from the strip club industry because people didn't understand how you could have pole dance just for pole dance without it immediately making you a stripper. So I think now we're finally at a point where people can understand that just because you're a pole dancer doesn't mean you're a stripper, but that also doesn't mean that strippers are bad. Um, so I think now we're able to kind of, see those two worlds collide in a little bit more spaces. But I still think that there's definitely bias in the pole dance community based off of the history of what they had to do in order to make it mainstream that needs to be worked on.
I was just about to like ask a little bit more about that, the history aspect. I think that's very interesting that you say, or correct me if I'm wrong, it's more kind of like to make this mainstream and kind of, I guess, commodify it, they had to put down strippers. I think that's very interesting to say that. Do you think
Hmm.
you could elaborate a little bit more on that? And if not, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know that they necessarily had to put down strippers, but I do think that they had to make it very clear that just because there's a pole involved, it doesn't mean that it's now a strip club. So I think when it first started, I mean, even when I was starting my studio 3, 4 years ago, when I was looking for spaces in the early days, I would get a lot of questions from my realtors and from the owners like, okay, so are there going to be, you know, men who get to come and watch the classes? Are there, the very specific classes of like, well, what do you wear? And
Mhm.
things like that. They just, people just don't even still understand that it is also a form of exercise where it can empower people and it doesn't have to be a strip club environment. Um, so in the very early days, I can imagine that they would have to make a very clear distinction between, this is a strip club space and this is not a strip club space, but I don't think that they necessarily needed to put down the strip club space, but say, like, this is what is happening here, just so that they could even get space, so that they could start classes, so that they could start changing the minds of people to seeing pole dance as not something that is as stigmatized. But now I think we're starting the work of making stripping also not stigmatized. We were able to take the pole dance part out, make that not stigmatized, and now we're trying to continue that work and make stripping also not stigmatized so that it can all be together.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. I
Of
wonder
course.
then if that distinction fostered then like more stigma towards strippers, but
Yeah,
I
unfortunately,
probably that's the case then. Or I don't know, but there definitely is like an interaction between pole and stripping
for
that
sure.
is unclear how that kind of dynamic started. And like, I have no idea if we'll ever know, it's only word of mouth speculation and older generations like saying
Yeah.
from their experience.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next. This kind of, I kind of already got into it. I'll just say it regardless if you want to add more to it. But
Yeah.
do you know about the history of pole dancing? Is it common for people to know the history? Um, in your perspective, who do you give credit for creating or fostering a community around pole dancing?
Um, so I don't know like the super history of pole dancing, like, where it actually originated. Um, I feel like when I have tried to look into it, it's pretty fuzzy on like the actual origins. I feel like a lot of strippers were probably the ones to start pole studios and kind of bring that to the mainstream because I don't know who else would have. However, I haven't actually, you know, done proper research on the origins of everything, and I assume that like even if people were starting and they said that they weren't strippers, I mean, maybe they were saying that they weren't just because, to save their um, identities and things like that. Um, so I definitely credit strippers for creating pole dancing. They are the roots of what we now know as pole dancing. And then it's a very muddy subject because up until now, where it's at least a little less stigmatized, um, in back in the day, it would ruin somebody's life if, I mean, it still will absolutely ruin somebody's life if it comes out that you're a stripper. But at least now, I feel like in certain circles, you can be more out about it, and I am so happy about that.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my question. It is argued that a subculture can be defined with rebellion or going against something. What do you think stripping is going against?
Hmm. I think stripping is going against the idea that women have to be reliant on like their partners financially. I mean, stripping is one of the ways that women can really make money that could change their lives. And I think a lot of women use it that way. And I think they're also rebelling against the fact that, you know, you you can be a respectable woman while also being a sexual person or a sensual person and owning your sexuality and using that to get ahead, but still also be respected. So I think that's always kind of the fight that we're fighting is like, we're humans, we're people, we're just doing this as a job. And that doesn't mean that we're any less of a person for doing that.
And then we're coming into the last parts, um, for more questions. So this kind of goes into more kind of the outsider perspective and wanting to learn what you think of that. Um, from the outsider perspective, there's a fascination, glamorization, and in some extreme instances, fetishization, oof, about stripping. When you come about these perspectives, what do you usually give in response? What are your thoughts when you encounter this?
Hmm. I try to encounter curiosity very openly. So if someone is curious about the stripping world, about stripping in general, what happens, I find that if I come at it with honesty and openness, then they are much more respectful, understanding, and just uh, open to strippers and the stripping industry. Whereas I find that a lot of times people have been very secretive, very gatekeeping about it. I think it tends to lead to a lot of misinformation about the industry and people questioning, well, what really happens? What do they really do? So I think that me being very honest about like what can happen, what are the dangers, what are the pros in my opinion, things like that. I think that it helps lead to a lot more understanding. But then I think if people come at it with a little bit more of that, fetishized view, I try to give them a little bit of the realities of it because I think that in those instances they just don't really understand that it's work and that it's not just something that we, you know, choose as a lifestyle, and they kind of just see it for one plane and they don't see
Mhm,
that there's all these other things that can be going on under the surface that aren't really good.
mhm. And kind of going off of that, for those who are considering entering the strip scene, what should people know immediately?
I think that they should know that it is a job. It's not glamorous. Like sometimes it can be really fun and sometimes it can be really enjoyable, but then there's also the other side of the coin where you can have a really bad night and sexual assault runs rampant and there are safety issues. So I don't think people should take it lightly. I think that it's a very big decision. However, I do also think that it can be a really great decision for certain people. It changed me in a lot of amazing ways. Even if I did have some bad experiences, I was able to learn through those experiences and make myself a stronger person. But I think that you have to know going into it that it's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah. To kind of go off of that, I feel like when there is a discussion about stripping, you could say that people who aren't in the industry emphasize a lot of kind of like the dangers of being
Mhm.
in the strip scene. Do you feel like you kind of, although you're giving this information, do you feel like you kind of have to tread lightly about kind of talking about the dangers? Because I feel like there's more of an emphasis about the dangers in the public or more mainstream rather than the pros, you know?
Yeah, I think it depends on who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to somebody and it seems like they are only talking about how much money they can make and they're only asking about, the the positive experiences that I've had, then I find that I can be a little bit more forthcoming with the bad experiences, almost like that giving a dose of the reality of what it is. But for the majority of people that I'm talking to, I do tend to tread very lightly on the safety issues and things that happen, and I try to give a lot of the realities of what we do in order to protect ourselves because it is a very dangerous industry, but there are things that we have put in place as an industry that help make it safer. So if you stick to those, then it does help a lot. There's obviously things out of our control, but like, not ever giving out anybody your real number, using only ever your stage name. There's a reason why we have stage names, and like things like that, where they're industry standards that help to keep us safe. So it does make it a little less dangerous. But um, yeah, I think sharing the positives is usually what I end up doing more so of because people don't really know that it can be an uplifting, empowering place.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that.
Of course.
And to conclude some things, ideally, where do you want to see Poll going forward? What does the future Poll look like to you?
Hmm. I would really love to see pole and stripping become more intertwined. I think that we're starting on a road of that. Um, I don't want to erase the side of pole dancing where people are doing it simply just to get a workout in or have that sporty aspect or that contemporary moody aspect because I think that that's a really powerful part of pole as well. And I don't think that everybody needs to gravitate toward the stripping side, but I want to have it as an option and something where where all facets of pole dancing can coexist inside of a studio instead of saying, well, we're this way and we're this way. It can be like, well, maybe there's a focus, but it's never like that if you do that, you're less than. All of these are created equal, and that's where I'm really hoping that we can get to.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Thank you. And then lastly, um, more specifically, what do you want your future to look like in your pole journey?
Mm. I want to continue being a student. I want to learn from a lot of the amazing dancers that are out there, maybe go to some retreats. I want to continue being a pole studio owner and potentially grow with some studios and continue to be able to kind of set a standard for what I envision pole to be in the future. So having a space where you can have multiple facets of pole and all of them being created equal. And just being, more in the performance space. I love performing. So I really want to, dive deep into offering performance and also partaking in performance.
That's really beautifully said. Yeah. I love performing as well. That's
Yeah,
so awesome. It's so fun. Yeah.
it's so much fun.
Right? Yeah. Hello. Well, thank you so much for this.
Of
And
course.
any last thoughts?
No, I think that that is a very well-rounded interview.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.